Wholesale electricity prices spiked to more than $500 per megawatt hour in the U.S. Midwest, roughly 5 times higher than prices elsewhere in the region. Joining us now to discuss is Sarah Montalbano, Energy Policy Analyst at Always On Energy Research. So Sarah, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. To start off here, why are electricity prices surging in the Midwest?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on today. It's a lot of factors, and the electric grid is a pretty complex topic, but a large part of it is that we really haven't been prepared for the growth in data center demand. That isn't necessarily an emergency for most locations, but in places like in the Midwest, where there are states that are foreclosing and closing down their dispatchable capacity, the kind of capacity that you can turn on and off with the flick of a switch. That is the kind of stuff that is reduced the margins such that uh, um, greater wind and solar end up having more of an effect on the grid.
Do you think consumers, because of data centers and the electricity demand that they require, will consumers eventually ultimately feel these price hikes, these wholesale price hikes on their monthly electric bills?
Mhm. Eventually, these wholesale prices get passed down to consumers. Of course, this recent event where prices spiked to $500 per megawatt hour, that is more of a temporary thing. That, in large part, was due to a transmission clog around some coal plants that only needed to generate so much electricity because wind and solar declined at the end of the day. But that kind of thing will become more frequent as our grid gets more wind and solar on it.
How's our reserve capacity? What does the spike mean for our reserve capacity and how much we have on there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have the number offhand for what the Midwest is looking like. The Southwest Power Pool, especially in the eastern region, which is covering most of the Midwest, really is looking at some tighter reserve margins than they would otherwise be looking at this summer. In particular, because a lot of this power is now intermittent. A large part of their reserve capacity is being built by intermittent wind and solar. And what I would note is that since about 2005 or so, the increase in dispatchable capacity across the country has been basically flat. We haven't built anything new that can be turned on in the evenings or at night when it's needed. So it's really a question of what's the reserve capacity made of.
So why isn't the United States increasing its pace in terms of creating more energy? Because if we look at the U.S.'s competitor on AI, China is one of them, right? And we're hearing stories that they're opening coal-fired power plants very frequently, more frequently than the United States. So if AI is the big thing now, the AI arms race, and the United States knows this and needs energy, why isn't the United States making more?
Well, I would have to say a large part of this comes down to state policies. So there are many states, one of them I'm expert in now is Colorado, and they are essentially saying that we're not going to be building more of this because we have certain policies in place for renewables, for clean energy, for greenhouse gases. And I would note that China isn't all that concerned about any of these goals. We are the ones hamstringing ourselves. And at the federal level, there's also the enormously burdensome permitting process, which really slows down the timeline of those projects that even make it through these state-based hurdles.
So what is the biggest challenge when we're talking about maintaining grid reliability, especially during peak demand?
An excellent question because I think there's a really serious juxtaposition here of the reliability and the affordability. You need to have both. And a lot of the time, um, not only is wind and solar degrading the reliability, but it's also degrading the affordability. So, what grid operators, what policymakers need to be thinking about here is how can we get the sufficient dispatchable capacity on the grid? How can we reduce barriers at the statewide level And how do we prevent consumers from really facing reliability threats? In my research in Colorado, we've found that, one of the major utilities there is saying, look, if we don't do anything, we're going to be looking at a 66% or so chance of having load shed events, the thing that prevents rolling blackouts next year. This is a near term concern. And a lot of states and a lot of RTOs are hoping on imports to solve the problem. And it simply won't work quite like that, as this Midwest emergency shows.
Okay, so what should policymakers do to strengthen more than what they're doing currently to strengthen America's long-term energy security? We're talking about maybe 10, 20 years from now.
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing that a lot of states need to be doing is to remove some of the bad policies that they have. They have requirements that are stopping very explicitly dispatchable generation from coming onto the grid. They're also choosing to make things more burdensome than they need to be. I think it's also really important to recognize that the US is in this AI race, whether it would like to be or not. And that data center demand can be leveraged as a good thing for the grid, or ignored, or decided to, place moratoriums on these things. So, I really think state policymakers need to be looking at this creatively, and to also recognize the limits of their powers too. They need to be embracing a certain amount of market policies in order to let the market respond and to say, hey, yeah, these prices are high right now, but that is attracting the power that you need to the grid in this moment. So I think there's a lot of state level policies that need to be tackled first.
Okay, Sarah, well, it's an important discussion and is one of such that is relevant to all of us, and I appreciate your comments today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.